All right. Loosened up. It's fintechs versus banks today, Joe. And on the one side, we have those that are nobly fighting for the right for people to access their own data. And on the other side, we got those that are righteously fighting to safeguard the consumer and make sure there's no fraud and that the consumer data doesn't fall into the wrong hands.
Sounds like a pretty good fight.
But not really. I don't think that's what this is all about. And I think for all the talk, and you'll see later the arguments that are put forth, I think it's really all about the big old honeypot of fees. That's what it's
just
about.
A charade for the fees.
I think it's all the charade. And so we got a lot of BS to wade through today. So why don't we get started?
Oh, let's do it.
Who's going to win this? Fintechs versus banks. So the story starts with Dodd-Frank. And that passed, obviously, at the end of the 2008 financial crisis, 2010. So there's a little section within the Dodd-Frank Act, and that's Section 1033. The consumer rights to access information, it's pretty straightforward. All it's basically saying is that a bank is going to make available to a consumer upon request any information about the financial service. So, the consumer financial product or service that the consumer obtained from such a bank. So it could be transactions, series of transactions, the costs, charges, and usage data, and it's going to be made available electronically. That's really all it's saying. It's just like if a consumer wants information, they're good about their own product, about their account or something, say the account balance, then the bank has to make it available to them.
Sounds pretty reasonable.
Yeah, pretty straightforward. But an important part that we'll get to later is the definition of consumer. Like, what does that mean? So we go into, this is section 1002, the definitions, and they define a consumer as an individual or an agent, trustee, or representative acting on behalf of an individual. So Joe, my first question to you, what do you think that last bit here might be referring to? The representative acting on behalf of an individual.
So, like, at least as I'm seeing it, you've kind of teed it up in such a way that last line, I was like, oh yeah, there's the fintechs.
That's exactly. So then the fintechs thinks it basically means any data that they want. So if you get an okay from a consumer, so imagine the terms of like an agreement or whatever, if you get an app, not to get too far ahead, if you get an app and you just kind of scroll through the terms of service, you click okay, and that's now that fintech has become a representative. And it sort of gives the fintech the right to just ping and request the data about the consumer, any data that they want anytime, and just pull it down. About 14 years later, the CFPB published their final rule on Section 1033. So this is a cool 549 pages long. Let's pull it up. One of the legal authority bits that it cites has to do with 1033. Now, there are a couple other ones that it'll cite, but really the main focus is 1033. Just kind of on a side note, if people are looking for an example where legislation is taken by bureaus and the crats that work there and then expanded upon to kind of fit their own vision of how the world sort of should look or what it would be like, this might be one examples. Just maybe keep that in the back of your mind. And I mentioned that
bureaucracy.
And I mentioned that kind of more importantly by the people that work there, maybe have a certain vision of how things should go. And one of the things that I want to tee up and show you far down has to do with this concept of quote unquote open banking. So do you know open banking? Do you know what the open banking framework means?
Not really familiar, no.
So I really hadn't been too familiar with it either. And they mention Europe down here. And I think that's probably a good example. Now, in Europe, they have kind of its own open banking framework. And that sort of came out, the rules for that one came out in 2015. And it was finally implemented in 2018. And it's called the Payment Services Directive Revised. So it's like the PSD number 2. And it just kind of says it allows customers to share financial data with third-party providers through APIs, thereby facilitating how maybe a consumer could change banks really easily, or that they could get a third party to aggregate sort of data for one consumer that has a bunch out of a bunch of banks, and then they could like make an app. You can imagine somebody might want an app that has all of their account balances in one place. You could just kind of look at it and then see where they are. Like that's something that a fintech would do. But in order for it to do that, it needs to be able to pull data very quickly from all the individual banks, and it has to just ping them every once in a while. Now, the manner by which it pulls the banks is through an API, basically. And the sort of European Open Banking Framework standardizes those APIs. It says, you have to make them available, sort of what they are and what they look like. In the US, we don't have that. We don't have sort of an all-encompassing standard like this. And
Wait, sorry, real quick. Sorry if you just said this. So that framework has been in Europe in place since when?
2018. That's when I think that's when the banks over there had to implement what they're calling Revised Payment Services Directive, or PSD2. Okay. I think the first one was in like 2007. And I think they're even looking at a PSD3, so maybe revise it again. Now, we don't really have something like that. But I think that the CFPB is trying to recreate something like that. And they're using that Section 1033 as the hinge point, as sort of the kickoff point. In this rule, when they talk about it, they start talking about congressional intent, which I think is a little slippery. What they're really pushing for is an open banking framework. That's really what Congress meant when they wrote that paragraph.
Well, baby, what I couldn't do.
That's the open banking model. But then the other one is page 7, where we're going to look at real quick. They're going to summarize what this rule does. Among other things, there are some paragraphs above and below this. We'll just skim right through this real quick. So the final rule, it requires data providers to make covered data available to consumers and authorized third parties upon request. Functional requirements, yada, yada, yada. This is, I think, the big sticking point. The final rule also prohibits fees or charges related to consumer and third-party data access. I think that's it. I think that's what this whole thing is about. Like this whole kind of broad fight. I think that's a big part of it.
Yeah, that's a pretty broad statement.
Yeah.
Fees related to consumer, which already seem to be defined pretty widely, and third-party data access.
And third-party data
even wider.
Access. So remember that. So on the same day, I think I've seen it actually filed as like October 23rd, but then other places I've seen it said it was filed the exact same day. But regardless, once this rule comes out, and there's a very long runway before you see this rule come out. I mean, this rule arguably started in like 2016 when they sort of started putting out feelers for maybe what the rule should look like. They put out requests for comments. They put out kind of what we proposed rules, so this was a long time they saw it coming, the banks. But immediately that same day they were poised and ready, and they filed a complaint. So let's look at the actual complaints, and let me get your thoughts as to what they like. Do you think they actually have something here? So in its proposed rule, the Bureau proposed to install for the first time a federal regulatory regime governing "quote unquote" open banking, a concept that appears nowhere in the governing statute. And this is something that the rule itself also said. Now, it says, among other things, the Bureau proposed to, 1, mandate the sharing of sensitive customer data, such as transaction history, account balances, and even account and routing numbers, Joe, through APIs with a seemingly unlimited number of third parties. What do you think about that?
Really wide. Like unlimited number of third parties for some of the like the most sensitive information that a person has with the bank. Yeah, I think this one's a little bit trumped up. This one didn't read to me to be that bad. So we have to keep in mind that this is the complaint. So it's going to use language that's trying to make their case sound as strong as possible. And the first part of it is like
the consumer told the third party that they could access this stuff and stuff like
You
that.
sign the terms and conditions.
They signed the terms and conditions. Fair point, Joe. Okay. And the audience is going to know what that is.
You agreed to this.
But the fact that they start writing even account and routing numbers kind of always bothered me. And I think this is a big reason why wires in in Russia, for instance, wires are sort of the main thing. But in the US, they're really not used. And I think, this is just a theory here, but I think that's because when you have to put in a wire, you have to request or you have to put in your account and routing number oftentimes, or you have to give it to someone else. And I think in, an American and the US brain, we view this as very private numbers, right? It's like, oh, here's my account number. Oh, something bad's going to happen. But that doesn't make a whole lot of sense because every check that you give to everyone has the account and routing number on the bottom.
They're right there.
They're right there at the bottom. How else is the bank supposed to know how to make the payment? I mean, it's a pay slip, it's a pay order. So
it's kind of funny for people our age. It's like we were born right on the borderline between using checks in day-to-day life like that versus everything online. It's like I do everything online, and I think, oh yeah, account number. Don't let anyone have that.
It's like super secret.
To my landlord. It's like,
and you write every time you give out a check, you're giving away your account number and write it. And they're sort of playing to the judges or something misconception about these things. In my view, they're definitely playing to that, which I find to be a little manipulative.
Well, like you said, building a case.
They're building a case. Still, I don't like being manipulated, and as soon as. Apparently other people, I think other people
do. You'd be a good judge, Luke.
I don't. Thank you, Joe. I appreciate that. But I couldn't. I've read there's a book I got, Views from the Bench or something. I couldn't be a judge. All right. So number 2, force banks to oversee and be responsible for those third-party security practices while simultaneously limiting banks' authority to stop sharing based on risk management concerns. I really didn't look into this. If this is as accurate as they write here, that would be a real problem.
Right.
I really didn't dig too much.
Totally nonsensical.
I didn't dig too much into this one. I suspect there are some holes in it, but let's just put that one aside. 3, outsource authority to private quote-unquote standard setters to set the rules of regulatory compliance. What do you think of that?
Private standard setters. What does that even mean? Knee-jerk reaction is like maybe I'm taking a little too glass half empty here, but I'm like, oh yeah, you use some private entity. They design the standard, but there's some incentive to maybe make it work a little bit better for the client that's paying for it.
Yeah, standard setting is a real battleground, no doubt. So like if JP Morgan or whatever is going to set the standard, they're going to make it look like their own.
Mm-hmm. Easiest for them to use.
But I suspect it's the private entity here isn't a bank. But regardless, again.
But it could be some entity that's,
We're just reading these for the sake of completeness here, Joe. I'm really just trying to get to number 5. 4, set entirely unrealistic deadlines to come into compliance with a new rule. And then 5, prohibit banks from collecting any fees from third parties in exchange for the newly mandated service.
That's the big one.
In my opinion. We'll see. That's going to be, I think, the common thread here. Now, at the beginning of 2025, so I think this is early February, Russell Vought took over the CFPB. And the Financial Technology Association filed a motion to intervene as a defendant. Now, why would anyone want to be a defendant in a lawsuit like this? So remember, the case was the banks filing a complaint against the CFPB. Russell Vought took over, and then the FTA said, I also want to be a defendant. And the reason they would do that is, I guess they don't have a whole lot of confidence that Vought is going to represent their interests or even the interests of the CFPB as the FTA maybe would like. So remember, Russell Vought has been a very strong critic of the CFPB. He wants it, I don't want to say burned down. Maybe that's too dramatic, but he doesn't like it. And the day after he got in there, he just said, stop doing everything. Remember that?
Not
Stop writing regulations.
Not really all that committed to the mission.
Exactly.
At least as it stood.
So the FTA is looking at this and it's like, oh man, I don't think we're going to get a fair fight here. Because now all of a sudden the defendant's like, oh man, you plaintiffs really onto something. So to that point, on May 23rd, the CFPB filed a status report. And the big thing that came out of that was, bureau leadership has determined that the rule, so this is that huge long rule that they published, is unlawful. We're going to put it aside. So never mind. Right. So, I mean, to the FTA's point. Now, on June 29th, the FTA filed something. And this, to me, is where I think things started getting kind of funny. So this is the introduction. And this is where I think, the righteous music starts playing and the hand goes over the hearts and you start looking over the distance. At stake in this case is a rule that protects consumers' access to their own financial information, promotes competition, and makes the financial services ecosystem safer. Joe.
Worthy cause.
In the Consumer Financial Protection Act, so that's Dodd-Frank, Congress conferred consumers, and here they have to point out, defined to include not only individuals, but also their representatives, key point, with the right to freely access their financial information. See what they did there? Yeah, so that's the legal document. But then, and this is sort of where I picked up the story, this is when it kind of came across my feed. On July 23rd, the FinTech Council, they wrote a letter. They wrote an open public letter to Trump. And I think we should look at this one. So now they're appealing, if the court documents were sort of appealing to someone's emotions, but this is sort of a rational person, presumably a judge. But now with these public letters, you're appealing to public sentiment, which is even just worse. It's just emotion squared. So they write in the language they use is like, your administration has consistently stood for innovation, competition, and individual freedom. They talk about principles. You recognize the transformative potential of digital financial technologies. You are leading efforts to enact and implement digital asset legislation and usher in a new golden age of financial progress and innovation.
Wow, gotta stroke the ego. As soon as it hit golden age, I'm like, okay, all right. There's no punches pulled here.
That progress is under threat, not from foreign adversaries, but from the nation's biggest banks. These large incumbent banks are taking aggressive action to unwind the recent progress achieved under your administration by moving to charge exorbitant fees for access to fintech and crypto apps. These actions risk debanking Americans from the financial services of the future. Now, the heart of this issue is the open banking rule, initiated during your first term. Whoa. Okay. It says later, let us be clear. Financial data belongs to the American people, not the banks. The freedom to choose financial tools and control one's own data is fundamental to free markets and personal liberty, core American values. You can right this wrong. And here it is. So file a brief, blah, blah, blah. Urge your administration to ask the court to affirm that consumers and not big banks control their financial data and have the right to access and share it with companies of their choice at no cost.
At no cost.
So, and then in response, what do the banks do? The banks look at this and they're like, whoa, hey, what? And they sort of start correcting all the stuff that was said in that letter, right? And they're kind of nitpicking a little bit. And so now they're coming out and, they're saying, firstly, that rule was put by Biden, not Trump. Get it right. And then they're like, 1033 puts sensitive consumer data at risk, Joe. Requires bank to share consumer with fintechs and aggregators without establishing fundamental data security safeguards, Joe. Right?
I can see that. So yeah,
That's probably true. And they're putting forward,
yeah,
and this is kind of the, if you want to come at it from, the noble point of view and wanted to underline that one. Yeah. Valid. Now, honestly, the biggest thing here, though, that I think sort of puts the argument in favor of the banks is number 5. And I don't know if maybe you've tried to sort of read my personal view. I'm sure it's kind of come through a little bit when I was sort of telling this story. But I think number 5 here, what they had said, is a tough one to argue. And what they're saying is banks and credit unions, we are already sharing data with fintechs and data aggregators. These letters that came out almost said that, the fintech world has been completely hamstrung. We have our hands tied. We can't do what we want to do. These apps don't exist in the United States because this rule that came out at the end of 2024 wasn't in place yet. But now that this rule is out there, now we can finally move forward with fintechs. And that's just not true. I mean, fintechs have been here, for over a decades. So it's like, how has that ecosystem, that fintech ecosystem, survived and thrived without this rule? You know what I'm saying? I mean, they want to try to put this forward and say like, we want to ensure that you can freely access your information and all that stuff. And the big banks are trying to stop that. And it's like, well, before that rule came out, they were freely exchanging the information. So what are you talking about?
So I'd be curious to see, like, like you said, they've already been doing this for 10 or 15 years, but was it as critically important then as it is now? Has something changed? The sharing, like the unlimited access to ping these APIs for consumer data.
Yeah. So I think in a market, in sort of a free open market, I think in contrast to maybe the more regulatory defined ones and driven ones, like in Europe, for instance, what happens is a company comes around, they find the issue, and then they solve it. And that's how they get value. And that's what I want to share with you is the story of Plaid, one of the biggest fintechs out there. So Joe, we have businesses over here. Here's Joe. Very happy. We've got iPhone, and he has got 3 different accounts. He's got a joint account, right, with his shares with his family. He's got a personal account, maybe for some personal things. And he's got a little secret account, okay, that no one really knows about, right, Joe? That's where he sort of puts the good stuff.
Like those numbers.
Yeah. So you can imagine like a fintech developer would want to come around and they would want to give this solution to Joe. I want to see everything in one place, right? But what happened was if you wanted to join up this account that says it with Bank One, you got an API that looks like a little square. It's kind of a headache to link up to it. Sometimes the banks are using super ancient technology. There's no set standard, whatever.
Sometimes.
Okay. All right. Bank number 2, it's got a different one. We've got a little circle here, and you can imagine that the number of banks, if you want to make an app that is at all, or a payment system or whatever it is, that's, truly universal and can be used elsewhere. You got literally like thousands or tens of thousands of these separate little connections that you have to go and figure out. And then we have, bank number 3 is a triangle.
Something like just under 5,000 chartered banks in the U.S.
but it's,
recently.
Right.
Just to
But for this specific example, I guess the number would cap out at around 1,000. But there are plenty of other institutions that you might want to link up to, investment accounts or funds or whatever it is. Now, what Plaid discovered, now this was in like 2012. I mean, this was over a decade ago or something. They found this problem and they basically made it into their own business model. They said, look, we already solved the problem of hooking up to these thousands and thousands of banks. Why don't you just work with us? Right. And so these are fintech developers. The Plaid's customers are like other fintechs developing these apps. They might also be other businesses like payroll or something. Anything in which this would be useful to just sort of hook up to the entire system at once. And in response, Plaid charges the fintech's fee. So you might have some money per month on like a prescription. You might have a certain fee per API. It might be per account, I think. I mean, the way in which they split up the fees is probably pretty sophisticated, just to sort of suit whatever the consumer, in this case, like fintech developers might be. So there was a market problem. A company came around, added value by solving that problem, and they charged a fee for it. Open question here, though, is that I don't have a solid answer for, is if the banks are currently charging Plaid a fee to hook this up. Or if it's just like, you can imagine when, Plaid's going bank by bank and negotiating with them, you could easily say like, look, if you don't give this to us for free, then we're going to have to turn around and we won't make you available onto the app or something, right? I mean, Plaid has some leverage here. Now, one of the other big bits of news that happened recently, I think just like at the beginning of last month or something, Jamie Dimon came out and said, you know what, we are going to start charging these fintechs a fee. And that's when things really blew up. Now, I don't know if you kind of question about the timing. It's like, they already know that this rule, that there's this legal battle going on right now. And I'm curious to know Dimon's thoughts about that. It's just a little strange that Plaid right now is charging a fee to these fintech developers, and they're earning buttloads of money. And then on the other half, there's just nothing. There's no compensation whatsoever. And the banks can kind of look at that and say, hey, wait a minute, right? They're getting, and with this rule, if this rule were to come in, then Plaid would have a huge windfall. Right? Because then it's just all income, no cost. I think in some reports they were thinking like 300 million or something annually that Plaid would have to pay to big banks or something, or maybe just JP Morgan, if the 1033 rule that came out of the CFPB was scaled down. So think about that.
Yeah. Do we know what that number is in roughly in relation to the size of the revenues that Plaid has?
Is that what it is? Plaid?
I'm not sure, to be honest.
This is, I don't. I can look it up real quick. I just asked. This is Google Gemini, I guess. But it looks like. So recently, April of this year, Plaid. There's news in Forbes. This Plaid raised $575 million in funding at a 6.1 billion valuation. Looks like estimated revenues in 2024 was 390 million, which is 27% increase over 2023.
Okay, so that would just completely wipe out the business then.
Yes.
300 million in fees against that.
I mean, again, I don't know. I forget where I saw that estimate.
I just mean like order of magnitude.
Yeah. But there has been some battle going on here between banks and fintechs. And I think more recently it's the story of Venmo. And then the banks sort of got together, and to fight that, they were the ones who came up with Zelle, the thing. And I think Zelle kind of won out, So
Did it?
There's definitely some battles going on here. So the banks might want to make their own version of Plaid or something. I don't know. Maybe knock them out. I'm sure there's some, in the world of business, things can get pretty rough.
Cutthroat out there, Luke.
Yeah, it's pretty rough out there. It's not nearly as cutthroat as the world of podcasting. It's brutal.
I don't even know how we
made it this far.
we do it every week.
So the last thing to mention here, so this just happened like last week, July 29th. The CFPB filed a motion to stay, saying it's going to rewrite the rule. So remember, this is an about turn. So a little while ago, the CFPB said that the rule is unlawful and should be set aside. And now they're saying, never mind, we're going to do a quick rewrite process, and we're going to give you status reports. And I think they might even put out a proposal within, 3 weeks. I think I remember seeing somewhere. So I'm definitely curious to see what that'll look like. And I'm really looking for one thing. I think that the only thing that matters is I think the banks are going to be allowed to charge a fee. I think that part is going to be taken out. That's my prediction. But what do you think? How do you think something like this is going to end?
One of the things that I was thinking about that I don't think we necessarily touched on directly is like so as this data is changing hands from the bank to the fintech to the consumer, from the consumer to the bank directly, all of those different flows, I guess like in one sense, like to the bank providing it, it's not cost free for the bank to provide it, right? They have to have their own developers to design the API, to security protocols, all of that kind of stuff. And I think one of the key questions is how are the fintechs using this data? So I'm not sure if like security standards, if they can use the data in this way, but rather than just being a pure utility, like receiving the account number, encrypting it, plugging it into the app such that that communication line's open, versus the other side is using all of that data across consumers. Like you could make an argument like, okay, we go and mask all the information or, all the individual information, but we use all of the transaction history to create this market research now. And now that's a totally separate product. So like data as a utility versus data as a product. Obviously, a bank wouldn't want anyone touching their data as a product, but I could see them. It's like, okay, yeah, with data as a utility, that's fine. Definitely seems like some sort of fee should be in the works.
Yeah.
Unless the U.S. kind of goes the European route where they mandate what the standard is, then that's not really much of a business anymore.
I mean, what you raise is a good point. I mean, if I would be curious to see the breakout between if you take like a typical bank, they're going to be pinged for information. And I imagine fintechs must make the vast majority of the pings. Vast majority. I mean, they're probably pinging like every hour or something, every account. How often do you look at like your bank account on your app or something, Joe? Once every couple days?
No more than daily, let's say.
Yeah. Whereas
but if
you get hooked up to like 10, 20, 30 different fintechs, right? They're just like constantly somebody at these banks, whoever runs with like information security or is responsible just to ensure like data integrity with the consumer information, man, must be having a heart attack like every day just seeing like the amount of data flows.
But I wonder, like, if, like, in a world where there are no fintechs and just individuals have to go to their computer and type in their password to see their account balance, that's an API or, a ping for the bank data. Now, if you're going to the bank directly, I don't know, does that still use the API? I'm not sure. But if a fintech is instead doing that, what's the difference if,
The other thing I mentioned that I think you've kind of touched upon is kind of interesting is I think the new rule says this. You have to provide a different solution to getting the data besides what's called screen scraping. You've ever heard that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, I didn't really know what that was, but like an API, you can just kind of get the information directly from the bank. A screen scraping has the fintech use the credentials of the consumer. So like they grab the login and password like from the consumer and then they go in that way. So this new rule says, okay, you need to provide something that an API that doesn't have to do that, which naturally is a little bit more dicey if you're starting giving a third party your login and password.
Well, but you're giving that third party the login and password either way, right?
I don't think so, no. So I can give you an example where I've actually like seen this happen. I thought it was a little weird. My wife's an accountant, and we used QuickBooks for our own personal, just our, very, very finance oriented household here. And we had QuickBooks, and we have actually accounting. We have a balance sheet. It's really just an income statement. We're not really trying to deal with, balance sheet quite yet, but we have an income statement. And one of the things QuickBooks allows you to do is to link up with the bank data, obviously. Like you don't want to manually punch in all your transactions, but you can go and through QuickBooks, it can go and pull the transactions from all your banks. But the way in which it does it, I thought was kind of weird because it makes you through QuickBooks put in your, say, Chase or Citibank login and password. I never really felt comfortable doing that. I think that's screen scraping. Whereas, the alternative was with you not having to do that. You're just saying like, okay, I give QuickBooks permission to go pull this data or whatever. That's the API route. Anyway.
Well, in both cases, like fundamentally, you have to communicate your username and password, though.
I don't.
Now, I think the key difference, well, just to access the API as a customer to the fintech aggregator or whatever, you still have to give credentials at some point. I think the key difference, which I agree with, like the web scraping route is far clunkier. There's certainly more information security issues, because fundamentally, I think the idea is on the web scraping route, they're programmatically, but like still kind of, I don't want to use the word physically, but they're going through like the web portal in a very similar way as to a person would physically, go and type something in. They're automating all that, but your user information is floating around a lot more through the other processes needed to log in that way. Versus the API route, it's far cleaner, it's more secure, it's less just overall pipes that the information needs to go through. So less points at which it could be leaked out.
I think the kind of the posturing from either side, I think the fintechs obviously are fighting for this because they are now protected on the expense side greatly if this rule comes into place. So that's why they want it. And then the banks, obviously, they're getting their hands tied up, right? So they don't want that. They just generally, it's going to restrict their freedom to engage in business however they see is suitable. So obviously they don't want it. So we'll see how
do you think this is going to go, like in the context of kind of our conversation last week with general approach towards bank regulation overall?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think my prediction is going to be that the new rule that they come out with, the proposal that they go out for comment. So one of the other things that the fintech said, I think that also probably stuck, is like there are quite a lot of laws, like procedures that regulatory bodies like the CFPB need to go through before they can make a decision. Like they can't just wantonly start removing rules, I think, and they can't just start wantonly put new rules in place. There's strict procedures. You got to go a request for comment. You got to, write up the response to that, and all that. And I think the idea of just being like, we're just tossing it, I don't know if they can legally do that without at least having a whole bunch of work. So I think that's probably one thing that stuck. But regardless, my prediction is going to be the new proposed rule is going to be a lot lighter. I don't think it's going to be almost 600 pages or something. All right, Jim. Well, that's all I had for you today. I know there were a bunch of interesting bits of news that sort of landed more recently, including, I guess, they fired the commissioner of the IRS. That was kind of interesting.
Wait, IRS or BLS?
Well, both. Actually, they're both bits of news, but I think the IRS guy's gone.
Oh, I didn't even hear the IRS one.
Jeez. The BLS, that was, fired. Otherwise, this has been another episode of the Root of All Evil podcast. Thanks for tuning in. I love you all. I'm Luke.
I'm Joe.
All right, we'll see you next week.
See you then.